So the fact that 1/9 of the research that's being presented in our SIG at this conference is still wasting their time on this question, I think speaks volumes. The other thing that we need to get past, or we need to move beyond, is research that focuses strictly upon perception data from the individuals that are involved within the K-12 online learning context. Not to say that figuring out what student perceptions, teacher perceptions, administrator perceptions won't tell us anything, but if that's all we're looking at and we're only looking at that in isolation, we're really, again, I think, wasting a lot of our efforts, particularly considering how much research has been done sort of in that descriptive model to date. If we are looking towards doing that perception research, it should be in the guise or under the benefits of trying to develop something larger, something that can be applied across the spectrum a little bit better. One of the things that we see our colleagues in higher ed do a lot that we do very rarely in the K-12 environment is to use models or conceptual frameworks or theoretical frameworks to guide our research. If you look within the K-12 online learning literature, I can only think of one specific study, or one line of research I should say, that has been developing a conceptual framework for the K-12 environment, and that's the work that Jared Bordov's been doing with his ACE framework. Amy here has been doing some, actually a fair amount of work looking at social presence theory and how that theory looks in a K-12 context, but the fact that I can sort of stand up here and point to the 3 or 4 examples where we've actually done this, given that we've got hundreds, maybe even thousands at this point, pieces of literature in the field, speaks to the fact that we're just not doing it. Whereas we see our colleagues in higher education, I mean, how many studies do we see that are focused upon the communities of inquiry framework, just as one example, using things like transactional distance theory, social presence theory, just to name a couple that just really haven't trickled down into the K-12 environment, but would be useful for us in terms of providing a framework so that a lot of the contextual type things that maybe don't apply from program to program or context to context, if we have this larger thing, model, framework, what have you, guiding what we're doing, it might be more applicable across those different programs. The other thing that goes along with that, and I think this is part and parcel, if most of our work isn't being guided by some larger objective, we have a tendency not to be using validated instruments. Now in most cases, those validated instruments tend to follow from one of those frameworks. So the COI has a validated instrument that they use. There are several that have been used with the social presence theory as an example. Within the K-12 online learning environment, we really have 2. Leanna mentioned one in the earlier session, the Educational Success Prediction Instrument, and then one of Rick's former students, Eric Black, had a validated instrument looking at parental involvement within the K-12 online learning environment. Beyond that, we really don't have anything else specific to our area, and we have very few researchers that are using any of the instruments from higher education in this cause. One of the other things, and Amy actually did a great job at doing this when she started our first session, where she told you a lot about the North Carolina Virtual School and the nature of it and how it was operationalized and what it actually looked like in practice. Because one of the things that we have a tendency to do within the K-12 environment that they do much better in the higher ed environment is to talk about the specifics of the context. The number of times I'm reading through an article as a reviewer for a journal where they actually go through and they're using cyber school, virtual school, blended learning, hybrid learning, and for them it's all synonyms, and they don't understand that one bit of research is talking about a supplemental program, another bit of research is talking about a full-time program. They just present it to you all as one type of learning, not getting into that idea of the distinctions between them. And as researchers, we haven't done a really good job at holding fast to specific definitions, so using virtual learning and cyber learning separately to refer to different things. And those are, I think, one of the main things that when I look at least the research I review, that's one of the big things I think the higher ed folks do a great job with that we don't. And finally, and I think this is again partly borne out because higher ed researchers are often working in their own context. So they're addressing problems that they're facing. As K-12 researchers, we're in higher ed. We're not sitting in the K-12 environment, and oftentimes the issues that we're coming to them with are things that we're interested in exploring. and not necessarily problems that are immediate to them. So that idea of more design-based research approach, where we are involving our K-12 partners to a much greater extent in the identification of what it is we are actually hoping to address in the problems that they're facing, I think would be of great benefit for us. So with that, I will turn it over now to my higher ed colleagues, and we can get from there.
You're next.
No, I think you're next, David.
I'm next. I was told I was fourth. Okay.
Your slides are there next, so we don't...
My slides are next, so I guess I'm next. All right, great. All right.
Ordered the deck wrong, or...
Pull out my notes so that I know what I'm talking about. All right, so my name is David Markovitz. I'm from Loyola University, Maryland, and apparently Rick was wrong. The edits that I made at the last minute did not show up on here. So
I've been wrong before.
Because I remember one of the small edits I made was to add my email address. But my next slide is probably not here at all. Nope, that's not there at all. So my first question to everybody is, you know how in the program it lists everything by category, so it's got a little 2-letter abbreviation. How many presentations at site this year do you think were categorized as equity and social justice? I've got somebody who says 1. 5?
I think there's like 3. I saw 3.
I counted 4, which really shocked me, because I think this is probably one of the most important topics, and if we're ignoring it, then it's a real problem, which is part of why I wanted to emphasize this. Now, it's a little bit disingenuous to say that we're not talking about it, because I just heard Amy a few moments ago talking about the kinds of supports that we need for learners who maybe aren't our traditional learners, or who aren't that perfect learner that we're thinking about. And there's a lot of other examples. The next slide that I inserted but is not up here also mentioned that I saw a great talk this afternoon, or I think it was this morning. The person was Seguno Chundur, and I'm sorry I'm mispronouncing her name, University of Cincinnati. I encourage you strongly to look up her work, Chundur. She had a great presentation, which was not labeled as equity and social justice, but was all about that. So that was, I think, the most exciting presentation that I saw here so far, present company accepted. And I also wanted to mention, since we're here in Austin, that if you're interested in the topic of equity and technology, that you really need to look up the book, Inequity in the Technopolis, Race, Class, Gender, and the Digital Divide in Austin. Since we're here in Austin, I thought that was an appropriate thing, and talks about some of those issues, but those are a bit tangential to what we want to get at. So, on one level, we think of distance learning as that great equalizer. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this cartoon. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So everybody's equal. And so that's great and wonderful. And so that's what we like to think about. And in fact, with technology, we like to think about that with all technology. And we just know that that is blatantly false. Everybody does know you're a dog on the internet. Everybody is not equal on the internet. In fact, if you are a dog, I'm just using dog as the example here, if you are, then most people don't even know you exist. And it's a real issue with equity when we want to encourage, as the keynote address said yesterday, we're trying to encourage student voice. Well, there are lots of voiceless students out there, and it's a real problem. So we end up thinking about, we talk about in higher education how we can reach these vast audiences. And so, my program, we just yesterday morning got approved to go online from our state. We got our final approval. We're going to go online, and that's to extend our reach beyond our geographical location, and that's wonderful. But who are we really going to be reaching? It's not clear that we're going to be reaching people who need to be reached, maybe, and so we really need to think about those things. And in K-12, many years ago when I taught high school, I remember we did an early experiment in distance learning where we had where the Latin teacher quit, and there were all these people who had taken Latin 1, and we promised them Latin 2, and so we ended up with these mailed videotapes and things and phone calls, and this was before I got the school hooked up to the internet even, other than through a dial-up. We had a dial-up connection in the school. So they were doing distance learning, and that was great. We had allowed K-12 to do something in this school that couldn't be done, and so it was wonderful. But then we have to start thinking about, the digital divide rears its ugly head. And I was looking for nondescript digital divide pictures because I didn't want to pigeonhole anybody in particular, but we have to think about issues of the haves and the have-nots. That's the first level digital divide and that's still a problem. I heard, I think it was yesterday, somebody said that there are many poorer communities where the phone is really the only way that they can connect to the internet, and many of them still can't, but many do. But the haves and have-nots is a problem, but it's a somewhat solvable problem. It's not a completely easily solvable problem, because in schools we can provide equipment, there's low cost ways to get internet and those sorts of things. But we really want to start thinking about the second level digital divide, because now we are trying to extend the reach of distance learning to a very wide audience, and in K-12 in particular, the first session they were talking about there are about 7 states that require everybody to take a distance learning course. That's everybody, and there are people who will not have a voice, who don't have the technology, don't have the skills, and we're not talking about necessarily specifically technical skills. We're talking about the kinds of skills and the social capital. We like to think of our perfect our perfect student in our mind when we say, oh, that student in distance learning goes online and has a parent at home who's helping with everything that's needed and all of that, and that's just not the case for a lot of the students that we're reaching and need to be reaching. And so we really need to keep in mind those students in maybe a single parent household, maybe in a household where that single parent works 3 jobs and can't be home, and we're not talking about I'm not going to go into some stereotype of some drug-ridden neighborhood and the mother is addicted to crack or whatever. Not even going there. Just thinking about the average family in lower socioeconomic status who doesn't have access to that social capital that's really needed. That's how people are successful. That in things like distance learning, that they have a set of skills, a set of technical skills, a set of social skills, a set of abilities that help them get through that, and we need to be really, really worried about that, because if we're not worried about that, we're going to be leaving behind a wide range of students that really can succeed, but possibly aren't succeeding. And I also just wanted to mention, even going in a different direction, we like to think of digital natives as this monolithic group of people, and I was looking for a really good digital natives cartoon, and I just had to use the New Yorker cover there. We like to think of them as this monolithic group, but they're not. They're very disparate, and so there are digital natives who are potential students, and they have great skills, they have minimal skills, they have skills in certain areas, not in other areas. And so we need to worry about the wide range of diversity that we're going to be reaching online, and not thinking about it as this monolithic set. So in my research, I've been thinking about support, and so as my program is going online, it's a master's program in educational technology, so we don't necessarily face as many of these issues to as much of a degree in a graduate program like ours, but we're thinking about the kinds of support that are needed. And so we are looking at things like embedded services within our programs. And so we just did a pilot with an embedded librarian that I spoke about yesterday in our courses, because you like to think of, we offer these services. We have, somebody mentioned in one of the, I don't remember if it was this panel or the earlier panel, we make those services available, that if people need a tutor, they figure out that they're not doing well, they can go out and get a tutor. We make that available. That doesn't always work. Not everybody's willing to reach out in that way. And so we look at embedded services. And so we had in our course as a pilot study an embedded librarian in the course, participating in the course, not in the entire course, but to some degree, and really reaching out to the students rather than relying on them to say, yeah, my research skills really aren't up to snuff, I better reach out to the librarian. They just won't do it. And these are those somewhat ideal students that we're thinking about that we have, and they're still not reaching out. And so I can imagine a wide range of students who need a wide variety of services, which is why I was happy to hear people in both panels talk about those services. We really need to think very carefully about those kinds of services. So I have a few references listed on my slides, but I'm not going to look at them, tell you about them, but there's a lot of really great references, and I think that's all I want to say for now, so we'll turn it over to the next person. It must be you. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. My talk is going to be on ways to ensure effective facilitation in the online environment. One thing that we fail to realize is that everyone is not familiar with studying online, even if they sign up to do so. Sadly, a lot of them do not have the proper preparation before signing up, so they have to learn by trial and error. This presentation is basically how do we ensure that our facilitation is effective so the students are successful in our courses. Email is important. You notice I'm walking around with my phone all the time. Why? The question is, with online students, they're often forgotten. Sad to say, we have up to 24 hours to respond to them. Some people take that whole 24 and then some. With my email for every school that I teach for is connected to my phone. So that way, when students email me, it pops up on the front of my phone and I'm able to email them immediately. Why? Because I do that to my traditional students. I should be doing the same thing for online as well. Activity on discussion boards. For my online courses, I actually have a facilitator. And I am a part of the course as well. And between her and I, we send out emails weekly. Sometimes 2 times a week, to remind students on what they need to do. To remind them on, hey, you've got to submit your discussion board posting. Please make sure that you do so. Why is that important? I'll tell you why it's important. Because when students hear from their instructor and their facilitator, they know that you're actually present. Too often, online courses go on and on and on until the end. And people don't hear from their instructor until the very end when it's time to assign a grade. I think it's important for us to stay online as often as possible. I'm in my online courses between 5 and 7 days a week, which is quite often, but at the same token, if there's a problem, I'm able to troubleshoot it early. Ensuring that all work is graded within 72 hours of submission. All of my students' work is auto-graded. So within that 72 hours, if, say for example, an assignment is due on Sunday, by Wednesday, it is done. It is graded. I've done the troubleshooting that needs to be done. If there are certain points that need to be worked out between my facilitator and I, we do so. What we're trying to do is make sure that online students are able to be in the class and learn from us. And not only is it assignments, I actually do presentations. I don't know if you all have heard of the whiteboard. The whiteboard is the equivalent of your front glass screen of your house. And what we've done at EKU, we're testing it out and we're trying to find out, do students enjoy that particular method of learning as far as short 3 to 5 minute clips, or do they prefer the very long lectures? Well, we already know the answer to that question. Working with additional facilitators to ensure cohesion, I have 2 very different facilitators for 2 different courses. Why? Because one is an expert in one course and one is an expert in the other. And both of them work as supports for me. And they're actually in the courses right now because I can see them. What does that mean to our students? That means that students always have access to someone. The sad part about online is students go online and they assume that they get that instant feedback, and with some instructors they don't. I'm one of those instructors that is different. When I receive a phone call from a student, I call them back or either email them back within the hour. Because students may have an immediate question right now and it needs to be answered right now. You can't wait for 24 hours. Be positive at all times. I've had some online students who are very frantic because this is their very first online learning course. When that occurs, it is up to me to calm them down. Why? Because I can't physically touch any of these students. I can't physically see them. But I can understand their frustration because I've also learned online. So be positive at all times. A lot of students are online because this is the one method that works with their current schedule. Being positive helps them to know that even though they have a whole lot of things going on, they can still finish your course successfully. Talking to students and definitely reaching out to them, especially those that are behind on their work. A lot of students online, the work sometimes passes by so quickly that they do need that small reminder just to let them know, hey, I'm listening online, I'm watching your work, and there are some things that are missing. Please make sure that they're submitted by such and such date. Lastly, use emoticons. I now have a wonderful iPhone 7 Plus. So I have been using those emoticons quite often. Why? Because it shows my students I have feelings. And I know how to use a cell phone. The interesting part about online is that I've enjoyed teaching online for various institutions for many years. But what I've done as of late, as you notice, I only have 2 slides. I have trained myself to stay within the 8-slide confine. How does that happen? Prezi limits me to 8 slides. So what I have done is in my online and in-person classes, I do what I can not to fully fill up all 8 slides, but I make sure there's enough content as well as work that they can go in and go back and forth. However, with those 8 slides, there is an ending point. There is an ending point. You cannot add slide 9 and 10, okay? But the best part about Prezi is I have a link to an address. At the end of that presentation, I can send it out to all students. For students that come to class, if they decide, hey, I don't have a notebook or pencil today, it's okay. I'm going to send you the presentation after class. So with online, for those who are actually teaching online and even traditional, find ways to engage your students, not just on discussions, but also in the online classroom as relates to homework, as relates to email. That personal connection is what keeps students involved in the class. Thank you.